Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Postgame with Simone. I am your host, Simone Deloach, and it is my honor to bring you this conversation with this beautiful person and one of my dearest friends, Andrea Mize. She shares her journey not only in joining a team as a walk-on, but becoming really, really good at it. She went to Indiana University, that's where we met, and there she joined the rowing team. Through adversity and through some really tough life changes for herself, she discovered something that she chose to lean into versus to be resistant on. And that shifted her whole perspective of purpose of living. That is when I got the opportunity to meet her as she transitioned to basketball. So her journey has had its ups and downs. And within the conversation, we talk a little bit about some of those struggles and what it takes to go through some of those things inside your sport, but then also outside your sport. And within that, wrapped around in a nice piece of bacon, is trying to find our identity. We are young people doing something that we've done for ages, right? In playing our sport, but also allowing ourselves to learn something new and trying to find out who exactly we want to be in this world and what kind of impact we want to have on those around us. So I really do hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. I enjoyed having it, and I will have to have her come back and share more of her story and more of what she's learning post-game. So this is Andrea Mize. Calling you Miss Andrea. Welcome, Andrea Mize. Oh my gosh.
Hello, Simone.
Welcome to the conversation, Postgame with Simone. I'm so glad that you could be here and have this conversation with me.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, this has been something you and I have had the opportunity to talk about many times, just our journey with being an athlete. But I think this special moment calls for talking about you specifically, and letting it be about you and your particular journey. So you and I met you sophomore year, 2011, sophomore summer. Does that sound about right?
Or my sophomore year, yeah.
I was a freshman. Okay, yes.
You were a freshman. I was a junior.
Wow. Yes. What was your first impression of me? And I'll give you mine.
Oh gosh. I don't know. I thought you were a little kooky but fun, which was good because I knew I was just as strange. Mm-hmm. So you seemed very friendly and someone that I could, get along with.
Yes, for sure. I definitely enjoyed your ability to connect with everyone. Like you didn't hold any boundaries as far as like, oh, I'm not going to be your friend because this, that, and the other. Like you just seemed very friendly with everyone. And I enjoyed that because that kookiness, I was allowed to be myself, which felt comfortable. So obviously it was something that worked because we've been friends since then.
Yeah.
I know.
10 years.
Crazy. So you have a different walk with your athletic journey and then everything else that happens like right afterwards. You started off, so give us a little bit of background. I know you as a swimmer, as a rower, as a basketball player, but what is your background? How did you get started with sports?
Yeah. So, if I first got started with sports, that started in elementary school when I lived in Australia, and tennis was one of our things. And my brother and I went to the tennis clubs and played there. But other than that, in high school, I was a swimmer, like you said, and played basketball. And I had no intention or desire to play college sports at all.
Right.
One of the things that kind of like a reoccurring theme throughout my life has been trying to find my identity or find who I truly am instead of like fitting the molds of everyone else. Mm-hmm. So I was taking college as a time to just completely start new. I always thought I was going to be like dressed in all black with a little beret, going to like the coffee shop, like doing poetry readings and stuff. And yes. I can say I've never been to a poetry reading in my life. So that did not transpire.
On the to-do list. We must do it then.
On the to-do list. I will not recite anything, but I will listen.
There we go.
But then, so in college, it was pretty much the first day I was walking on campus I went to Indiana University.
Hoosiers.
Yeah, I was like walking on campus to go get my books, and like a crowd of probably like 20 girls was standing at the sample gates, and they all were like, oh my God, like, and swarmed me, you need to try rowing, you need to come out for rowing, you need to, and I just kind of was like, rowing, like, what is that? I've never heard of this. Like, you want me to what? Sit in a boat? And I just kind of like laughed it off and kept walking because I was like, that's really weird. And then about like a minute down, you just hear these like fast footsteps like running after me, and then just like a slam on the shoulder, and it was the novice coach, so like the basically like the freshman coach for the rowing team, and he was like, you have to come out, you have to like meet me at the boathouse, you would be perfect for this sport.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was like a little intense and scary, but at the same time it was like cool to be like, oh, okay, people, they want me for something, that's nice. And kind of like at the time I was out of state, going to a new school, didn't have friends. I'm a very shy person and like get a lot of anxiety. So I knew like finding friends or kind of finding a group would be difficult.
Right.
So I kind of was like, well, you know what? This could be a way to at least like meet some new people. So I decided to give rowing a try. And I remember they wanted us to like sit in the boat in spandex because the seat moves back and forth. And I was like, absolutely not. So I showed up in like basketball shorts down to my knees, like refusing to work out in spandex, and then my shorts would get caught in the seat and actually like would pop the seat off. But yeah, so all that to say, like, I had no intentions of being an athlete at all. Maybe doing intramurals here and there, and then it ended up I was on the novice team. So like, again, that freshman team for the rowing team for about like a semester before I moved up to varsity, because it turns out I actually was really good at the sport.
Wow.
So yeah, so I went from not being a collegiate athlete to being one of the top at
that sport. Is insane. I don't think I knew that part of your journey as far as being, essentially a walk-on to the sport, to the team. And then progressing from there. I knew you as, a superstar rower, the top, right? Just being really good at what you did. That's incredible. Do you, looking back, like you said, wanting to find a sense of community, wanting to find a sense of friendship. Did it give you that? Did it give you that sense of family?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I have a very unique experience. Yeah. Long story short, no, but some of my best friends that I have, especially from college and just that have stayed with me through life, are either from rowing or from being a rower and how I like joined basketball to get to meet you.
Right.
But yeah, I was a very emotionally unstable young woman in college, and was not the nicest person, did not make the best decisions. And so the community I was looking for, I kind of hurt a lot of people along the way, unfortunately. And I never really felt like I belonged kind of with the team.
Right. That's something that I know we'll touch on a little bit later in the conversation. But before we get there, like you said, thank you for saying that, first of all, for acknowledging your 18-year-old self as who she was, right? This emotionally wrecked, if I can, right? This just emotionally like overwhelming, trying to do the best, making the best decisions as you could have at the time. I can relate to that. And I'm not always the kindest to that version of myself, right? Because of her journey, I am who I am today, and I'm doing what I'm doing now because of her, but I'm not always the kindest and speaking wellness over her. So I appreciate you doing that in that moment. Something had happened during your journey in that transition between making the next big decision for yourself, in which you spoke spoken to me about, as far as life is too short. Live, do all the things that you want and desire to do, and do your best at them. Do you mind speaking a little bit about what that statement meant to you then and what it means to you now?
What the statement, like, do you want me to describe kind of how I arrived there?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So pretty much, freshman year, like I was just all over the place, had no clue what was going on. I was good at rowing, and they put me in this like not U23. It was a freshman level national team camp. So like for the summer, it was a week long at Cornell. And, like I'm sitting with some of the best rowers, the freshman rowers in the country. And it was kind of like a crazy moment to actually be like, okay, I'm like good at this sport. But then what also kind of started, and I'll get to this later on in the story, is once you start getting noticed by the national team, if you're good enough, you have your whole life start to get planned out for you,
right.
Not by yourself, but by others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that I wasn't at the same level as everyone at the camp, that I was like so raw, because everyone had been rowing for at least a few years. And here's me who hadn't even been doing this for a full year. But, one of the coaches was telling me, no, there's like a lot of promise for me and all that stuff. So it already was like, I was in this weird state because I knew my life was taking this direction that was nothing that I thought it would be.
Right.
But I was still open to it. So anyway, that took place in the summer. In the summer, I lived in my hometown in Wisconsin and was a lifeguard, and one of my favorite jobs and all that stuff. But during the summer, we did work a triathlon, and long story short, I had to perform CPR on someone, and they didn't end up making it. And, it was a very traumatic experience that has lived with me, honestly, like to this day. I still talk to my therapist about every single session, like beginning session I have, because it was a moment where, one, I saw people who I really respected freeze in a moment. So they weren't able to actually go save someone's life. And then it relied on, just me and one other person to try and save them. And she wasn't saved. And what also was crazy is, so she was only in her 40s and had 2 kids that were around the same age as me. So like really hit home, being a 19-year-old and feeling that you were responsible for someone else's death is very heavy. And, I come from a family who doesn't believe in therapy. I come from a family who doesn't show any affection. We don't hug each other. We say, I love you at the end of every call, but like, we don't talk about feelings. If an event happens, get over it. You have the mindset to just move on. So I didn't have any of like the emotional or mental support from my family. It's not something I could talk about with the other lifeguards, because we all were so traumatized by it. And also like they were embarrassed because they froze in the moment. So it couldn't be a conversation there. Luckily, my rowing coach, so I told him, he knew how important like it was to receive mental health support for this and therapy. So he forced me, not that you can really force, but it was like a good push to receive
strongly
therapy. Strongly suggested, tied my scholarship into it a little bit, not that he really could take back my scholarship, but yeah, so like I had to start meeting with a therapist once I got to school. And I'm not one who likes to open up easily to other people. So, in the therapy sessions, like I refuse to talk about that event.
Right.
And, it's, what happened though is like from that, and now looking back how I can see everything and how I acted, is there I was already a little unstable, not knowing what I'm doing with my life. I have this traumatic experience that, like you said, just taught me like how fragile life really is, and how unexpectedly it can end, and that life is so short. And
Mm-hmm.
here I am sitting in a situation that I'm not passionate about. I'm not like loving my teammates. We didn't, it wasn't the worst yet. I hadn't done like all my drama and damage yet. But it still wasn't like a community where I felt fully accepted.
Right.
And so like, it's, I started thinking like, why, why would I waste my time doing something that is not like giving me joy? Is not like, fulfilling this passion inside me, which is a whole nother topic too, because it's really, it's fascinating because like there's just so many levels of what was going on mentally with me at this time. And I think like it's so difficult what we put student athletes through, these very young um, kids, they're still kids going through all of this stuff. But I also had this need and this feeling that I had to be the best. I had to be in the most recognized sport or position, perform well academically. If I was not the top of every single class, if I didn't get a 4.0 every semester, it was failing. And so what a quick side note, what's really interesting is, so with rowing my freshman year, I probably should have started out with this too. I didn't fully hate the sport or like think bad about it. Like I did feel cool that I was good at it. Okay. And that it was a sport. And like here I could say is like, finally my family's going to accept me. Finally, my family is going to be proud of me because I can say I'm a D1 athlete. So we had this like regatta, which is the boat race in Chicago. And, all my family's pretty much from that area. And you can see all the spectators are cheering on and having fun and just rooting everyone on. My family is sitting in this like big bunch and start singing row, row, row your boat. And, so like in the moment, you laugh and you think it's like funny or like, okay, it also is super embarrassing, but it kind of really stuck with me because I'm like, that was a point where it was, they didn't respect the sport. They found it as a joke. And so from that moment on, I'm like, well, if my family doesn't think I am in a sport that is respectable, or if they still don't see that even though I'm performing high, that like I'm not, an athlete in their eyes, what's the point? So I kind of had that, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed to be a rower because it wasn't a sport like basketball that gets recognition. And let me tell you the difference of how you are treated if you are a basketball player versus a rower, even if you're the worst basketball player versus the best rower, is insanely different. So I don't know if you want me to keep talking into my story of what kind of happened after, or.
Well, I do want to highlight some things. First off is, you're kind of making this connection between like, it doesn't seem like it's ever just one thing. Even now, living in life as a retired athlete and doing adulting, sort of, it's like, when I personally come up against challenges, I'm starting to recognize that it's not just the challenge that I'm currently looking at. It's kind of a plethora of other different things that have added up to this one thing. And so when I choose to make decisions, I think because of my athletic background, and maybe you can speak to this as well, because of what I've gone through as an athlete, I'm choosing not to make irrational decisions based off of what's in front of me, but kind of put the pieces together and make the best decision with everything. And what it sounds like, based off of your young experience of understanding yourself, understanding where you fit in, understanding your purpose, you at the time when you chose to move and shift from rowing to basketball, you were doing kind of just that. Unbeknownst to you, right? Looking back, hindsight 2020, you can say, okay, maybe I was doing a little bit of everything, doing one thing, looking at everything, and just trying to find happiness, trying to find bliss with the hand that I was dealt. I was going to say shitty, but the hand that we are dealt, right? Would you say that's a little true? Or
I would say like, yeah, it's very true, but I would add one little caveat to it is, however, all the decisions I was making, I thought was what I wanted, but it always was to please someone else. So I was making in my head, I rationalized this big picture. Okay, if I'm not fully happy with rowing, well, let me go to basketball. Why did I choose to do that? I chose to do that because my family thought basketball was a more respectable sport. Okay.
Right.
Rationally, that decision made absolutely no
No
sense.
sense.
But in my head, it did. And
Yeah.
if I get to like the root cause of it, like actually, I probably should have and would have chose to either stuck with rowing or just chose to stop being an athlete and just like be a
Altogether.
student
Mhm.
altogether, because the root cause and the root problem was that I was starting to let other people influence me, and then really started freaking out when rowing was planning my entire life.
Yeah.
Like, I was a sophomore. I was an all-American like candidate, as a 19, 20-year old. And which is really cool, right? Because it's like, oh,
That's
junior,
cool.
senior year, maybe I could have actually been one. But
Mhm.
I wasn't allowed to walk on a curb, like just, a 3-inch curb, because they thought that if I fell off, I could like sprain my ankle or hurt myself. And, looking back at it, it makes sense. I understand what they were doing, but how I felt like an object.
Yeah.
And I felt that like I had no say in anything. Um,
Hmm.
and so the decisions, again, like if I was fully looking big picture and rationally at everything, I would have like gone to the core or the root of it and had a conversation with my coaches and been like, look, I'll take this year by year,
Right.
type of
Yeah.
thing. Don't plan my
Mhm.
life out. Or I'll do this in college, but I'm not going to do national team stuff,
Mhm.
something like that. But it's also like with what you speak of making these decisions, that theme I did not, in that lesson, I did not learn until COVID. Um,
Right.
I realized, you know, 30 years of my life I spent making decisions that I thought were for me, but really were to please other people.
Right. To be accepted by other
Mm-hmm.
people. Yeah. You know, thank you. I'm going to say that a million times, but I truly do appreciate you sharing this with me. And then selfishly, thank you for choosing basketball, because I'm going to not get emotional right now. But although it wasn't the best decision, you joining the team has given me one of my most favorite relationships ever in life. Um, shit. Totally tearing up right now. Despite the pain that you were facing, I think we have been able to, I won't past tense it because we're still doing it now, to be a very solid backbone for what it looks like to be a woman, to be an athlete, to be just a person in this world, and trying to maneuver what it means to be successful, right? And um, to have joy within that, and not feeling pressured or excluding the pressure to be a certain thing, to do a certain thing, because that makes you this amount of money, and with that amount of money you can do this type of thing. And so that kind of takes me to my next little major point that we've talked about over and over and over again is, you know, what could have been done differently, right? Yes, you mentioned, like, yes, you could have went to your coaches and said, hey, let's do this differently. But also, to your point, you're an 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old person, young adult, that at the time we just weren't thinking that way. I had a beautiful conversation the other day, or today actually, with a young man, and we were talking about how, unbeknownst to us and also the coaches, we actually see them very much as an extension of parenthood.
Mm.
Um, Individuals who are adults who can help us make the best decisions, right? Like our parents did when we were living with them. So, not to put any pressure on coaches, but what could bridge that gap between making 18-year-old decisions and having somebody run our life, but also still living in that freedom?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think it honestly goes beyond just coaches, right? And just beyond student athletes. So like I currently work with
Yes.
um, students who transition from like high school to college, whether or not they're an athlete or not. And, it is something that I notice a lot. I would say hands down, mental health is huge. Mental health support, is so important. And I'm someone who, I work for a nonprofit. I just finally got insurance. So I just now can finally afford going to like therapy, right? And so like I understand how it is a privileged thing to receive therapy. And so that's so difficult, right? Because not only do you have just like a financial gap, there's also so much stigma around receiving mental health support. You think, oh, you're only going there if you have an issue or if you're broken or if there's some sort of disorder. And that's not the case. Like, think of it, if it was like actually mandated, right? And there's a great organization called Through the Game, who is trying to start to do like mental health support for student athletes and coaches and parents. And I'm just like, well, what if we had that, right? Like, what if it was like actually every single, it would be great if I could say every single college kid or just every single student in general, right? Regardless of whoever's transitioning out of high school should receive some sort of transitional support. You have a monthly like group session to learn something, and then you are required to have these weekly or bi-weekly check-ins, because having someone else who can be an objective observer, right, and like look at everything, like removing themselves, someone who isn't a part of it, someone who doesn't understand from the coach's view of what's going on or from your view or whatever the situation is, and being able to actually talk through these decisions with you, and get to the core root or just help you transition. I think like, I had my therapist for like the sophomore year, but I didn't know how to use him. I was going to him because everyone perceived me as broken because of the traumatic event that I didn't actually get to work with him and learn how to heal. Like, in all honesty, I think he thought, I'm going to say like crazy, not saying like I was like, he actually thought I was crazy. He was a great guy. But at times, because I knew I was just like whirling in circles, but I also didn't feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable with him, because I was always like scared that here I am, the broken one, going to see you, versus if everyone saw you, it would be completely different.
So do you think a little bit, and just, getting into her mindset, your younger self, do you think a little bit of that could have been because he was a white man? Like, do you think representation could be helpful in this?
He was a Black man.
Oh, it was a Black man. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think he was a man, which was tough.
Right.
And also he was training to be a sports psychologist, not a regular like therapist. So that's something else that's interesting, right? Is that in college, some universities, some schools will supply you with a sports psychologist or someone in like a sports field who are supposed to help you with performance. However, what I've noticed with talking with athletes or being myself, my own experience, it's the mental health that's like outside of that, the other stressors of life of the coach and all of that is what you need to work through. Performance will naturally go up if you can get those core issues fixed or worked on. And so I think like, if I had a woman, I would have felt a lot more comfortable working. And also I think like not necessarily having the sport in the title, because for me, what was difficult too was understanding whose side are you on? Are you reporting this back to my coach, or are you doing this with me?
That's good. Yeah. I didn't think about it that way, because there is a difference. There are different, as a mental health professional myself, there are different pockets of what we would talk about with each specific career path, career choice. And so being a sports psychologist is different than being, can be different than being just a licensed professional counselor or a marriage and family counselor, right? That's a really good point. I think the intentionality is there, right? To bring somebody in to have these conversations with your student athletes. But the muscle, I was talking to another athlete, and we were discussing how there's
there's a possibility that the muscle that we train as an athlete in our brain, the mental toughness that we have to do one more rep, to do one more suicide, right? The running drill, to do anything the coaches demand of our bodies to do, right? There's that mental capacity that you do train, and it does get stronger. I can say my mental capacity from freshman year to senior year is vastly different, and it showed up, right? I was able to be the leader that I need to be my senior year for the underclassmen versus being that freshman who was literally trying to think of every way to get out of that drill. How can I hurt myself, but not really hurt myself? Anyway, it's a whole game. But where was I going with that? To talk about like the mental capacity to do that, right? But then it takes a totally different muscle to manage life outside of the sport, outside of being a student. I had lost a grandparent. I had relationships that were failing. I had experienced some abuse of its capacity. And so those are things that not only that my coaches nor my professors could help me with, if that makes sense. Having the distraction of school and basketball, I can say was helpful to get me through the next day. But as I'm learning now as a young adult, some of those traumas that I experienced that weren't taken care of are still here, and they're not going anywhere until I take care of them, right? So that mental muscle, to your point, there is a difference, and it should be considered when working with student athletes.
100%. And it's interesting when you say also the like mental athlete muscle that we're talking about too. I, within the past year, have had some strong feelings kind of against that, right? Like it served me well. Like I have done some amazing things academically, career-wise, like all this stuff, how I walked onto the basketball team was because of that push, the never give up, the chase, like type of a thing. Should I have been on the team? No, not at all. But, but it was that like the training or the mental muscle you're talking about. So someone I follow on social media once put up this quote, and I think I shared it with you before, but it said, if you have to constantly, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but it's like, if you have to constantly chase after a dream, it's not the path you're meant to take, or it's not what you're supposed to do. And that like struck me so hard because, a theme in my life has always been that I take the difficult path. I achieve it in the end, but it is a rough path because I keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And right, like ever since we're young, we're told you can achieve anything in the world that you want, which, okay, cool. Yes. Let's like have some sort of like positivity in there. But, and then you couple that with like this intense athletic mentality that you keep pushing. So in your mind, you kind of warp this sense of reality of thinking that you truly can achieve, some things that may not be achievable or may not be the path you are meant to take. It may not be where you're meant to go. And so I kind of look at that with basketball, right? Is like I pushed and pushed and pushed to take this path. And I do believe like everything happens for a reason, and I'm supposed to meet you. So that's like why, but I could have probably met you a different way if I didn't take that path. And then that path, it was such a difficult year, and it ended in so much other trauma and difficulties that I had to go through that, looking back, I'm like, that wasn't the path I was meant to take. And what ended up happening after I pushed myself and achieved this goal, I put myself in a more traumatic experience than I was before. Yeah, sorry, that's like a roundabout thing, but it's just like with that athlete muscle, I just feel bad for pretty much like telling everyone that life has to be this difficult thing, that like you can't get anywhere in life unless like you're sacrificing and pushing and failing and pushing through. Because what I found is when you're truly in your element, right? When you're truly like doing the stuff you're supposed to be, life can be easier. Life doesn't
have to be a struggle.
Yeah.
So curious question for you, where would the balance be for those who have this understanding of push, 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 right? Where is that balance between pushing to the limits and also scaling back to give yourself some breathing room to make those mistakes, to fall and fail, not once but multiple times, in order to find what works for you? Because to be honest, without failures that I've experienced, I wouldn't know, I wouldn't know what the fuck I was doing with my life. Right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I don't think I would have a sense of direction as much as I do because of what I don't want to do, because I've tried it. Does that make sense?
Makes 100% sense. And this is something, again, it's so new of like my whole thought on this. So like, I wish I knew what that line is. Is it like try 3 times and then stop?
Right.
You know, is it you just kind of get like the feeling that it's just time to stop? But like, I don't know, because I also still, whenever I say, oh, stop, I already have this like mental thing of you can't stop, you have to keep going. So I wish I knew the answer. And I agree, like failures is how I learned my life lessons. Failures have gotten me to where I am. And I think, that's maybe that's the thing, is it's not, your goal shouldn't be to achieve whatever this outcome is. Your whole goal should be learning from the path that you're taking, the failures, the bumps in the roads, and all that stuff. Because I think if you look at any of like some of the big struggles you've had in your life, and you're actually like where you ended up achieving whatever it was you wanted, was that what you actually needed, or was it the little lessons that came along the way?
Exactly. It's not the destiny, it's the journey. Wait.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
It's not the destination. It's the, yeah.
Right. Yes, to exactly your point. Absolutely. And so to speak on that a little bit more, that's something that you and I have come to terms with after the fact, after we've kind of made some significant left turns. So we're like, oh, okay, I need to back this bitch up and let me put my turn signal on and go a different direction. How can we, and I think we just got done talking about this too, how can we share that with young minds? Because I'll be honest, I wasn't listening to nobody. I thought 18, 19, 20, 21, even 22, 23, after college, fresh into like the real world, I thought I had everything I needed. In subtle ways, right? I wasn't like this like boastful person that was out here telling people to get lost. But in a lot of ways, I wasn't necessarily listening to a lot of the messages that were being sent my way. What could be something that we as we're so old. What could be something as us who have been out of the game for a minute, right? A significant amount of time. How could we share what we know to young people that they would receive it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it kind of goes with the work that I do now. So one, looking back, it's also, if I was 20 and talking to a 30-year-old, I'd be like, they're so old. Like, this is insane. Right. So it's like, you kind of like look for this mentorship. If you're 20, you want to talk to like a 22 or a 23-year-old because you think they know everything in the world. I'm sorry. No, up until you probably hit 27 is when you really start to maybe
things start shifting,
learning. So, I think like mentorship is huge for every stage of life, of having a mentor who has significantly more experience, not significantly like 20 years, but let's put a 10-year gap in there, right? A 10 to 15-year gap. Like even us right now, like me, I should be talking with someone in their 40s to kind of see what happened in their 30s.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do is like some of the students I work with, right? I'm 31 and they're 19, 21. And I know that they don't listen to me because I do put myself there and I'm like, that's fine. But what I do is I tell them kind of like my own experiences, let them make their own decision. And if it works, I'm happy. I'm so happy that it works. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't, and they fail at thinking at what it was. But the nice thing is, because then what I do is, since I'm there supporting them the whole time, right? Or if you have a mentor who's there supporting you the whole time, you can be like, okay, that didn't work. Let's now try it this way, you know, because you're developing a relationship, right? So think if we were 18 or 19 years old, if we had someone who was in either their late 20s or 30s, who we already are like, you know, this is weird. Like you're in the, like, you're a weird type of age. I don't understand how close we are, but they let us do something in our own way. We fail. Now we are going to be a little bit more vulnerable and open to whatever lesson they have to give us. And I think I would have been a lot more receptive if I had a constant person in my life who wasn't related to me,
Right.
you know, had no affiliation with like whatever I was trying to like achieve and do, who would support me in my crazy adventures, but be there to help pick me up whenever I failed and help set me back on the right path. Because one of the most tough things, right, is when you fail, it's getting back up, which is the most difficult part.
Right.
And if you don't have someone there, most important. But if you don't have someone there, it's going to be tough, and your life can just spiral down for a while.
It can change directions very quickly. And I will say mine, in my experiences of the fall down and the attempts to get back up, if I wasn't careful, and I haven't been, right, I'm not perfect at it, still falling down, but if I'm not careful, I know where that can lead me. And it's a very dark, can be very dark place. Interestingly enough, we kind of work together. We have tag teamed and have given these students that you were speaking of an opportunity to have that bridge, right, between understanding what mental health is, one, but then, you know, the stigma of finding a therapist, because everybody needs help, not just those who desperately need it. Everyone deserves to have a bit of backbone, a bit of solid ground to go to, foundation. So we've teamed up, and I have been that resource for not only the company, but for your students. And it has been heartwarming for me. And I can only hope that for the students that I work with, it's been the same for them.
100%.
To what you're speaking of, I think what came to mind as you were speaking about the desire, the need there, the position that we all need, that mentorship. I recognize that even now, it's difficult to find adults who are willing to be vulnerable with me. And vulnerability isn't some weakness. It's not a weakness in many ways. And Brene Brown, who is, I think, the professional, the best at it when it comes to vulnerability, it is actually our best strength. Because when you're able to be vulnerable, you're allowing yourself to connect, and you're allowing yourself to be as human as humanly possible. That gives you the permission to make mistakes. That gives you the permission to not have all the answers. That gives you the permission to live and learn without any expectation, without a boundary, without a box that says you have to do this, to be this, to go this way. And so I think I know that one of my passions, one of the things that just runs in my blood, is this desire to have what I did not have, to be what I could not find in many adults, right? Like you said, outside of your parents, outside of people who you work with, just that one person who can passionately sit with you in your extreme vulnerability and breathe with you and just sit in that space. It has been, I believe, in the last few years, the most important thing that I could bring to the table, and then also search for them for myself.
I 100%, you know, and I know like all my students love working with you. So it's awesome. Obviously we can't talk about what they talk about, so I don't know all of that, but I know what they say is they get excited to meet with you and talk with you. And so something that I've also, you know, kind of noticed with you talking about the vulnerability is when I first like got into the role of teaching. So I was a teacher right after college. Like I thought, you know, because like all our teachers never were vulnerable. Like you thought, you didn't know that they had lives outside of the classroom, right? So you keep it so separated. And what I found throughout time is how you really do get like really transformative relationships with students is when you are vulnerable. So I remember like, intelligence is something that I like regard so highly, and I think like that's my self-worth. And so like if there's any flaw in my intelligence or like what I'm capable of, like it really is like a dagger to the heart. And I remember the first time that I told people like I can perform very well math, science, like all of that stuff, but I have always had comprehension issues, and it was something that I could never admit to anyone. And I also have like some of the lowest vocabulary that you will like see, like whenever I do standardized tests, like it's so low while all my other scores, so it kind of balances out. And I remember, always trying to present myself in this way of that I know everything, that I can do everything. Then when I started opening up to students and like, look, I struggle with comprehension. I don't have the best vocabulary. I'm reading this word that's on your screen. I don't know what it means either. Let's both look it up. And it's when you can show others that you are not perfect, when you can show others that you too struggle, not just struggled, but struggle.
Yes, currently.
That I think is when you really make these transformative relationships. And kind of going back to coaches, if there's one thing that coaches could do, if you don't have money to supply therapy, if you don't have money to like provide like all these extra things, like coaches, all you need to do is have one of you that like is actually just vulnerable. We regard you so highly, like you said, kind of like parents, but also you're on this complete pedestal, right? Like you pretty much own us. That's how we look at you. Show some vulnerability and talking about your day of why you're frustrated today instead of just making us run 25 times. Like, I think you'll find a different relationship with all your students.
For sure. Transparency is what you're speaking of. The ability to not only face the man in the mirror, but allow those who are watching you face the man in the mirror, see all of it, and communicating that both verbally and physically, emotionally, spiritually, however that fits for you. Okay, Andrea, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I hope that this is continuing to be a healing process for you. And I hope that this conversation is a part of that healing. Last couple questions before we end. Something that really stuck with me, that a coach has mentioned was, eventually the ball will stop bouncing, right? You'll have to hang up your shoes and move on. And at the time I was like, okay, it'll stop bouncing. And my reality is that it eventually did. My body physically could not handle any more of what I was putting it through. And so for you, I want to ask you that question. How did you prepare for the oars, right, of your rowboat, of your boat to stop rowing? How did you prepare for that transition when you had to kind of hang it up? What did that look like?
Yeah. So nothing in my athletic career, kind of that you've hinted towards, has been the traditional way that most athletes do stuff. So, I did rowing for 2 years, and then I did basketball. Towards the end of the spring season of basketball, like pretty much knew it was not going to work out, right? Just how everything. So I actually reached back out to my rowing coach in the spring saying like, hey, can I come back? And he, of course, was like very excited about, because we stayed in close contact throughout the entire year. And he just said, I just need to check with your teammates to essentially do all that. So, in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, who wouldn't want me on their team, right? because how I can perform. And I remember I was sitting in like one of my labs, and I received an email from my coach, and he was like, look, like they don't want you back. And he was like, I tried telling them, like, think about, my strength and all that I can do, and like speed bring to the team. And the girls were just like, no. And like, I don't look at them like as, oh my gosh, they wouldn't let me. Like, they honestly made the best choice ever. Rowing is a sport where everyone in the boat has to trust each other. Everyone in the boat has to be on the same team. Everyone has to just like have kind of like the same energy. Otherwise the boat's literally going to rock, right? And you're going to lose speed. And I was not the nicest person for a few years to them, and I really hurt them and everything. And it's stuff that I've been living with, of trying to like work through all the hurt and pain that I caused other people. And so that was like a moment where I was like sitting in lab, and it was just bawling my eyes out, because I'm like, now I'm not wanted. Like, this thing that I thought I had, and this like special power I thought I had, I don't have anymore. And rejection is not easy, and it wasn't being rejected by one person. It was being rejected by a group of 20 to 30 girls that at one point you thought were your friends, because some of the people who rejected and said no, I didn't know that I hurt them. Like, I actually genuinely thought that I was still their friend. So it really took a mental toll. So I walked on up to Cook Hall, and we had some sort of film session. So I'm already like an absolute like mental wreck, because like in my mind, I know I'm not playing basketball next year. And now I just found out that rowing isn't happening. The film session ends. Everyone's asked to leave, but I'm asked to stay in the room with the coaches. And
just you and the coaches?
Remember, just me and the coaches. And I remember like Malika's face like leaving, and she just kind of looked, because like everyone knew kind of like what was about to happen. And this was the same day, no joke, 2 hours apart from each other of when I got the email. And then that's when the coaches, cut me, and they were very respectable with it all, saying like, it's just not going to work. It's something I knew. And I just lost it. And it wasn't. And the thing that I hate is that I know the coaches thought that those tears were because I wasn't a part of the basketball team, which whole different story about how I was treated there.
Right.
Those tears were because now I had absolutely nothing, and I just faced 2 big rejections in a row. And so I just like was so defeated and so embarrassed. Like, how do you go and tell your family? And I actually didn't tell my family for a long time. And I didn't tell my mom until like years, that like, because she kept being like, I don't understand why you just didn't go back to rowing. And I'm like, because I hurt so many people, and they didn't want me, and they flat out told me they didn't want me. And so anyway, so like I took this summer to like heal. I did this, I was going into my senior year. I did this like volunteer thing abroad. And that's where I started to really get into education. And so like going into my senior year, I was at least excited. But my coach and I the rowing coach and I kept talking, because he was convinced that he could convince the girls. Like, he basically was, I'm the head coach, I'm going to make the decision. Right. So talk about all the bad choices I've made in my life. So now, I know that I still can come back to rowing going into my senior year, in knowing that I could. So I was on track to graduate early. So I graduated in like 3.5 years. So I could come back then for a 5th year to get my master's at least. So that was the plan in the summer going into my senior year. And then, I started freaking out, because I started having, I don't even know if it was you, but it was some basketball players were on campus during the summer and hanging out with some of the rowers. And they're bad mouthing you. They're talking bad about you all this time. I had a text message from honestly someone who I thought was my closest friend, basically tell me like, I fucking hate you. I hope you die. Like, you're the worst person. And like, no one ever wants to hear that. And especially if like you don't know what you did.
Yeah.
Literally, the thing that I did was quit the team and then now try and come back. Well, I know I did some other stuff in there, but to her, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And so it really started messing with me mentally, because I'm like, okay, already I have to go back to this team that absolutely despises me. Like I said, rowing is a team where everyone works in the same boat. So it's actually not uncommon that if they don't like someone in the boat, you can work it out to get someone kind of kicked out, because people, they have these things called seat races where you kind of like see who's faster, and they can manipulate it, right? If everyone's on the same board, we're going to go slower when this one person's in our boat versus someone else. And so like, I knew that was a thing. I knew how important relationships were, and that I had none. And on top of it, I'm like, not only like do I have to like reprove myself to the team, I would have to get back in rowing shape, which is so tough. Going from like rowing to basketball shape was so tough. But like, I'm sorry, rowing is the most difficult sport ever. Okay. Maybe the only one that's more difficult, like, or swimming. Those two are like together because it's endurance and sprint based. Like, so getting back into that shape started freaking me out a lot. And, you know, it got to the point where what it came down to is I sat there and I'm like, this is going to be people I started with my freshman year, their senior year. Do I really want to ruin this year for them? Do I really want to bring this drama in, this pain on them? Because I see how much pain I've caused. Like, no matter what that could do for me in my life, right? Of however this like rowing thing could take off, it wasn't worth it to hurt them anymore. And so, you know, I told my rowing coach, I'm like, it's just not going to work out. And I told him, like, you know, it's such a team sport and I just can't do it. And what sucks is, so him and I always had close contact, right? So I at least felt that I had this other kind of, like you say, like parental figure with me all 3 years. Once I made that final decision, he like would not even take my time of day because there was no point anymore. He's a great guy though, great guy. And I don't blame him for anything. So it just like, it really hurt. And I didn't quite know what to do. So like my end was so abrupt. But what I kind of like just focused on was, okay, what's the next step? I was graduating in December. And so I started just applying for jobs, and I found a new, you know, passion, which was education, and, you know, applied for Teach for America and all that stuff. And so, yeah, kind of like my transition out was, I didn't prepare. But it made me realize how much you can impact and influence people without you even knowing. How one word you may say, or one comment you may make, or one Facebook post that you post that you truly like just did in the heat of the moment and didn't mean to attack, can really ripple out and hurt so many people. Yeah, and it's interesting because like a lot of people I meet now, they're like, oh no, you're like so nice, I couldn't see you being mean. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I have hurt a lot of people in my life, and I truly regret that. And I've had to live through a lot of pain to get to a point where I can be friendlier.
Yeah. And I'll also accept you. I thank you for bringing that to light. Nobody talks about that transition and what it's supposed to be like. So I wouldn't even know what's expected, right? Once you stop, what does that look like? How do you keep those connections? How do you develop those relationships? You know, you're kind of thrown into this, oh, I guess I got to get a job now, you know, like but something I wanted to point out, and one of the reasons why, as a young adult, I believe in transparency, like it's my middle name, is because when we are able to know ourselves. And I tell my clients this, all my clients, I do all kinds of stuff, but I definitely make sure this message comes out. The most important relationship that you can have outside of a spiritual or some kind of, outside of your self entity, whatever you believe in, the most important relationship that you could have is one with yourself. Because when you understand yourself, you can start to communicate a lot differently and do things, move around the world differently, treating people differently, understanding your triggers, understanding where and when and how you can be vulnerable. What are your coping mechanisms and how do you develop those? And I'm bringing this up because of the story you shared about, your journey with relationships and how you had to learn very much the hard way about your words and your behaviors and how that affects people. If I could give the world something, I would challenge us all to do a little bit more mindfulness of self. Because when looking back at your story, that day that you had those 2 significant bombs just drop on you, you had that. You also had your family of origin and things that were going on outside of athletics and academics. You had, the past still with you. I mean, a number of things, like we talked about in the beginning, that all kind of led into that moment. And so my hope, my wish, my desire is that, we continue as human beings to grow in our experiences for ourselves. Because when we can be our best self or a better version of ourselves, it will manifest into the relationships that we have. And you'll start to see that, okay, maybe I don't need this relationship, or I'm going to have to trickle back on how much I give you because I'm not sure I can give you, I'm not even giving myself that much, right? So we start learning and doing a little bit more adulting in our emotional states that I think helps, and it just spreads, and we start seeing who we really want to be and what we're choosing to do and how that adds up. So I appreciate the hell out of you. I hope you know.
Appreciate the hell out of you.
I am just so freaking proud of you. I learn something new about you every time we speak. And you talk about mentorship, and I know we are friends, but I definitely value every single word that comes out of your mouth, even if it's the wrong thing. And I can say, girl, that's not right. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. And we could just talk about it. And I think what we have built is so healthy. I expect us to be old hags and continuing to do this exact thing.
We've talked about that.
That expectation. So last question, 18-year-old Andrea, 19-year-old, 20-year-old Andrea, what could you give to her, either tangibly or emotionally, physically? What would you give to that young woman today?
I think this is like a powerful question, and it's so interesting. It reminds me a little bit of RuPaul as well. So yes. Love that. I think like you kind of said it earlier, like if you say something, you're probably not going to listen to it. And I think that's true, like knowing myself and like going through this conversation, I'm like, yeah, if I say something, it won't work. Then I'm also like, what object could I give that wouldn't be corny, right? And I think the biggest thing that I've learned in life that took me a long time to learn was how you have different like everyone's like, oh, it's a new chapter, so you think it's event based. It's actually like like an age range based. And so I think what I would probably give myself at 18 is a chapter book, right, with kind of like these age ranges already pre-filled in, to know that the decisions that like I make now is not going to be the rest of my life, right. That I am going to be able to start over, and just knowing that how much knowledge is going to come each year. And I think like if I knew that, because I felt like everything, when you're 18 or 19, especially when you're on your own, and you're taught like, or even graduating college, right?
Yeah.
You think that job is going to be your lifelong job.
Oh.
You think that career will be your lifelong
Yes.
career,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's like working in the same place or not. But like, I would have never predicted for myself that, you know, I would have moved 3 times and that I would have changed my job every 2 years. I would have changed profession 3 times.
Wow.
Like, and it's only been coming up on 10 years of being graduated.
Whew.
And I've held so many different
things.
jobs. And so I think like that is something refreshing, right? To kind of know when you're 18, 19 years old to be like, okay, cool. I only have to live through this short term, right? That I can restart if this isn't working, right? If I had those first 2 years and I'm like, rowing isn't working, cool. Let me restart. If teaching, I did that. If it doesn't work, cool. Let me start over, right? It doesn't have to be this lifelong thing.
And I'll challenge that starting over. When I hear that, it's like clean slate, clean canvas. But in reality, it's not so clean because you're taking your athletic ability, although you're not doing it anymore, you're using that differently, right? Although you're not teaching anymore, you're still taking that and carrying that into the next.
Yeah. And I agree, like doing a hard reset, that's never a thing, right? It's it's the flow, but it's not having to take everything that you did with you.
At the end of the day, you were more than just that sport. You were more than an athlete. I love you so much. This is so cool.
I love you so much. You're so amazing.